When there's no more room in hell, the dead will listen to Bloodfest, the podcast.
Hello, and welcome to Bloodfest, the podcast. I'm your host, Nate. Y'all know me, know what I do for a living. So something very odd is happening. There's been a new political party that took over the country recently. You may not have seen it on the news. They're calling themselves the New Founding Fathers, and they've instituted a little new wrinkle to our democracy. And in just about 4 minutes, 3:57 actually, we'll be starting the Purge for 12 hours. All crime will be legal. Now, that might mean that some really bad sex stuff is going to happen, but we're not going to talk about that at all. We're going to focus on murder and robbery, maybe some beatings. So anyway, Casey, how you doing tonight? Are you ready for the Purge?
I am definitely ready for the Purge. Bring it on.
Standing. Josh, did you sharpen your chainsaw?
I did, which doesn't seem to work since it doesn't have any gas, but I can stab people with it.
So our guest tonight is the one and only Aaron Rabinowitz. Aaron is a philosopher. He lectures at Rutgers University, which means he's way fancier than we are, because none of us could even afford to go to Rutgers University. We went to state schools. We're nobody important.
Rutgers is a state school.
Oh, is it? I didn't know it was a state school. It seems like a fancy school. He's also...
Oh, it's, yeah.
He's also the host of Philosophers in Space, a podcast about the intersection of philosophy and film, books, TV shows, etc., and Embrace the Void, a cutting-edge philosophy podcast. So anyway, Aaron, it's great to have you. How are you doing tonight?
I am also absolutely ready to be purged. Luckily, I already live in the Purge because I live in modern-day America, and the Purge is just that, it's fine.
Yeah. So before we talk about the movies we're going to talk about tonight, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. The first is, so you're an ethicist. Would you call yourself an ethicist? Yes. Okay. So
I would. It is my preferred self-identifying term, yeah.
What drew you to the study of ethics? Why was that where you focused?
Yeah, and also, obviously, who knows why we do anything? We all pretend that we can look inside our own heads, but we're actually far worse at it than we think. Was it because, when I was 6 or 7 or something, my parents noted that I had a very strong sense of justice and right and wrong, and so I was always just hardwired to give a shit about this stuff. Or, I got to college and I found out that, doing philosophy is still something that people actually did in the modern world, and got really obsessed with that and found ethics to be my favorite version of that. And just really, the reason is I love teaching, and my favorite thing to teach is ethics. And so that's what I spend pretty much all my time doing.
Okay. Well, so I have to tell for everyone else here, although it's a direction I was leaning on my own, listening to you is what really, well, as you put it, luck pilled me. You brought me to the conclusion that, yeah, it's luck all the way down. It really is. So I want to.
I just want to note for the listeners, you said it first. I didn't bring up the word first. now that's been broken, I don't have to feel guilty anymore for making everything in the universe about luck.
It is.
So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I feel very welcomed to your community that you've already brought up my favorite pony so that I can climb upon it and ride about some.
So my other question is, why do you podcast?
Yeah, so the practical, the first answer would just be because I like teaching, and podcasting as a way to do educational material that is accessible to non-academics, non-philosophers. In personal life chronological terms, the reason is I was in Brooklyn around the time of the Trump election, and also got a job at Rutgers at the time as an adjunct, and was commuting across Staten Island, so that's an hour and a half commute depending on the time of day. So I had a lot of time to listen to stuff, and I started listening. And I was, born and raised in a hippie atheist family for the most part. So I was not very involved with movement atheism. I was one of the 1 in 7 that doesn't feel as much of a need for that when they have to leave religion eventually. So I, got involved because it was very clear to me that the problem was white Christian nationalism at this point. It was just totally rampant. And so my friend and I, GW, started a podcast, Embrace the Void, which was a lot of like coping with living in the worst possible timeline by, doing philosophy and fucking around, and eventually evolved into like GW took a step back after the first 100 episodes or so. And I kept doing it as an interview show, and it's been a fun one for that. And then I added in there eventually Philosophers in Space, originally with Thomas Smith, now with Callie Wright, which again was just another like giving people access points who like wanted to do more philosophy, got to do like one class of it in college, don't feel like they really understand it that well, but like want to get what's going on in the background of a lot of their favorite content. And so we try to like make all that stuff fun and accessible.
I'm going to pause for a second. Hey, Casey, is that your keyboard?
Might have been, but my mic was muted.
Oh, okay. Somebody's typing loudly. Who's typing loudly?
I did also hear typing.
Yeah.
I'll back you up on that reality.
Yeah. So Josh doesn't know how to type, so it wasn't him. So I want to say I've really been enjoying, and I loved Philosophers in Space with Thomas. Love Thomas, think he's great, but I am loving Callie on there. I really am. I'm glad you brought her along.
Yeah, and like Thomas and I had a lot of fun. Thomas was sort of burning out, and that's fair. Like podcasts are weird. Every other kind of content, it's understandable when it ends, but podcasts by default are treated as if like ending is weird or a bad thing unless it's a very specifically timed serial. So like, it makes sense to have people trading in and out on content like that. And yeah, it's been great having Callie on. It's fun to like, there were folks who were saying, you've done like 200 episodes or whatever. You can circle back around and talk about some of the stuff that you talked about 200 episodes ago because nobody remembers it. So that's, it's a time where like Callie can be that kind of like learning all the ropes kind of person and figuring out all that stuff. Folks should definitely check out Callie's Queersplaining podcast, which they've also picked back up on alongside doing the philosophy stuff. I should also, I guess, mention, since you asked what, I'm currently working on a PhD in education, and really my primary focus is luck pilling, in the sense of like I want to try to convince everyone of the taboo belief that everything about everyone and our universe and everything we experience and everything we don't is luck all the way down.
Yeah, and eventually we'll get everyone convinced. Everyone will be on that side.
That's the Bodhisattva path on a long enough timeline. Liberate all sentient beings.
All right, so we came together tonight to talk about the best thing that could ever happen for this country, the Purge. The Purge. So The Purge has been a series of movies that started out actually kind of blandly. I mean, the first film is a fun film, but it's just a home invasion horror with an interesting twist to it. I think what's interesting about the series is starting with the second film, The Purge Anarchy, they open up out into the world and it starts getting more openly political. Does anyone think I'm nuts for thinking that that's kind of, the series kind of explodes with the second film?
Interesting. I wouldn't call you nuts, but I would disagree with you on some of the parts of that. Like, I think the first one is exceedingly political, for example, extremely political. And what I love about this series is that it is one of the best political satires in that it, like The Purge, it spares nobody. It absolutely satirizes neoliberal centrists and then leftist accelerationists and then white Christian nationalists. And it's happy. It's like BioShock. It's an equal opportunity. Go fuck yourself. Your politics are terrible. So yeah, I would argue that there's a ton of politics in the first one. And I'm a personal, I love the classic like trilogy of, your Pitch Black into Chronicles of Riddick, where it's like the first one is a tight little horror and the second one goes big, or Alien into Aliens or something, Terminator into Terminator 2. Yeah. Right. The first one is, it sets a lot of things in motion, but if they're good, they're, they're really about a person and not just a concept, which is great. And then the second one that like opens up with world building, which I'm a big fan of that kind of approach. And so like, I like the first one a lot. It's a scary fucking movie. Yeah. And the second one is also a great extension.
Yeah. So I think my favorite of them is Election Year. I think as far as being kind of savage with the satire, I think the first Purge is it's got more teeth, but Election Year is just such a well-paced film. To step into your territory with philosophy, there's a thing in Election Year that gets me every time, and that is the senator who's running for president, who they're trying to assassinate, is in a position where some of her allies have taken the minister, who's like the main figure of the new founding fathers. They've taken him hostage and they're going to assassinate him. And she's insisting, no, if you do that, we're just like them. You can't do that. We'll be just like them. And I want to slap her when she says that. And it's because I always think of, so there's a line in Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men. Anton Chigurh says to someone that he's going to kill, if the rule you followed brought you to this, of what use is the rule? And I keep thinking she's going to follow a principle all the way into the end for everyone. I mean, sure, your principle might be, no, we don't kill people, but that's only a good principle if not killing them leads to a better outcome for the most people. If keeping him alive, because that's what your principle says to do, leads to more human suffering, then your principle was useless and should have been tossed aside.
Yeah, and I think that's I'm sympathetic to that critique of sort of liberal, what do you call it, sort of appeasement, right? A kind of appeasement approach of liberalism. At the same time, I'm guessing you are of a kind of progressive to leftist bent.
I'm
in this sense.
Extremely leftist, I think. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So part of what you're saying is I like the version of the Purge that most explicitly goes after the people that I hate.
Yeah,
or think are the absolute fucking worst.
Kind of.
Rather than the parts of the Purge that actually take some shots at me, myself, and I a little bit more. You know, like Purge 2, I think, is a little bit more, hey, you leftist accelerationists, maybe don't ignore how a purge actually mostly fucks over the marginalized more than anyone else, which was the whole point of Purge 1.
Yeah. Well, that's something I very much like about these movies is they very quickly make it very clear that instead of this being we can put all the crime in one place and that will control it kind of thing, the people in charge are really just, we're gonna kill the people that we think are maybe subhuman. And if they don't kill enough of each other, we'll help them out a little bit. It's very clearly a slow-motion genocide. Yeah,
it's a kind of social Darwinism, eugenicism kind of approach. And, like, you know, I think it's worth picking through all of the different layers of critique here, right? So, this is a show about, or a movie about how, like, society deals with problems, right? And I think we could probably all agree at least that, like, the Purge society is not stable, right? There are kinds of dystopias that are stable, like Brave New World. If you think it's a dystopia, is a very stable one. Yeah. This is like a thing that could happen potentially, but like, Parable of the Talents, for example, Octavia Butler's version of this, right? That's a thing that a society collapses into and then comes out of in that sense. The Purge is a kind of like, someone tries this as an approach, everything falls apart because you couldn't have, and that's what you get to by like Purge Forever, is that like, there's no way to contain this to one night. It's all nonsense. So it's a story of a collapse of a society dealing with problems that starts with a critique of neoliberalism and then critiques the accelerationists and then critiques white Christian nationalism. I'm not sure it gives an answer to the problem. It just says, like, this is what happens when each of you tries to like enact what you think is something like justice.
Yeah. So I've always, and I'm very interested in what these movies leave out. Like, I always, every time I watch these, I think they are really underestimating what a big deal fire would be. Because, Chicago's gone, man. The first time somebody kicks over a can with no fire department, we're done. And also, although the films hint at the implication of sex crimes, it's not looked at face on. And obviously, for, reasons, there's no talk about the horrors of child sex crimes that obviously would be going on.
Right. So the first thing we have to acknowledge is that this is thoroughly allegorical in the sense that you cannot take this seriously as a concept. because it is so obscenely would collapse much more quickly than they suggest, right? It's far, like if you took them seriously, it's far, far worse, right? There's no coming back from a night of like crime-free activity in this sense, not even once. That's not how a society functions. So you're right. They totally are underestimating the amount of like fuckery that would take place and the amount of instability that this would create on a societal level and how quickly it would destabilize the basic social contract. I also, if you're looking for like, what are they leaving out? They're leaving out the degree to which 99% of human beings have no desire to engage in the purge.
This is,
absolutely no desire. And this would not go over well ultimately in that way. And wouldn't, would there be a bunch of fuckery? Yes, but it would be contained in certain kinds of ways because the vast majority of people are so psychologically hardwired to not want to cause harm that if you did this, and this is like a common confusion people have psychologically, and you see it with like discussions about, Hobbesian state of nature versus, do we need social contract, etc. A lot of our media overestimates the degree to which in a crisis human beings turn into animals, like Lord of the Flies style.
Yes.
The reality is we are pro-social creatures, and the vast majority of us become collaborators in those situations and murder the non-collaborators.
So my view on Lord of the Flies is always that it is not a critique of humanity. It is a critique of upper class white teenage boys from England.
Yeah, and that's a similar thing that people will say about the Stanford prison experiment and sort of situationism critiques of human nature in general that I think overestimate the degree to which human nature is malleable to society telling you, no, it's okay now to murder people. One of my favorite versions of the Purge is obviously going to be Rick and Morty's Purge episode. Just absolutely the pinnacle of this concept. And like it deals with that. It like acknowledges that like how quickly even Rick and Morty, some of the most jaded, people in the universe, quickly sour on the idea of just rampant violence in this way. They get back there eventually and murder a bunch more people because they feel justified in doing so. But again, your brain is evolved to not want to murder a bunch of people. That's just a fact. And like you can break it so that it'll do it, but you won't be able to do it consistently for long and you will die. Like there's the stories of like the Nazis at the concentration camps who had to decide who was going into the chambers versus into the camp. They would get blind ass drunk just to do their jobs. And like the gas chambers themselves were a solution to the problem of like PTSD caused by having to just gun down innocent, people, women and children in mass.
Yeah. Most people can't do it. I think you're right. Most people can sit by and watch it happen though.
That's a complicated question, right? One of the one way to analyze the Purge is psychologically as a discussion around situationism. So just real quickly for folks who are not familiar, typically unintuitively individuals, intuitively we think of ourselves as being stable, settled characters that persist over time. You are a good person, quote unquote, or a bad person, which means, unless someone really pushes you, you're not going to try to hurt some other people or something like that. Really radical situationist critiques will say, actually, look, hey, if I, make you late or, pipe in the smell of fresh bread, I can mess with your ethics really effectively. And that was something that was popular for a while, but has questionable replication value. And I would say we've over assumed that human beings just can be broken easily, like with things like the Milgram experiments being not well represented in the Stanford prison experiments. People have internalized a kind of narrative about humans where like we will just go bad immediately in these situations. But the reality is we're very hardwired in the other direction. And it's very hard. And that's why, like teaching people to be soldiers is partly about, damaging a part of themselves, or let's say allowing them to turn off a part of themselves that otherwise would prevent them. And, there's a lot of Humankind is a good book about this recently. That's kind of a pop psychology book if folks are interested in why the Purge isn't plausible, it's allegorical.
So what you're saying is that Christopher Nolan, in his film The Dark Knight, is probably the one who got this the best. When the Joker assumes that the regular people on the ferry will blow up the ferry full of criminals, but turns out neither one of them wants to blow each other up.
Yep.
That's exactly,
And like literally, yep, in the sense that the reason we're collaborators is because it's a more effective strategy for the prisoner's dilemma, which is literally the scene that you're describing in Dark
Yes.
Knight. It's a very cheesy prisoner's dilemma.
Yeah.
The prisoner's dilemma, for folks who are not familiar, is a basic game theory problem where you have two individuals who need to collaborate or cooperate. And if they cooperate, it's better for both of them. And if they don't, it's worse for both of them. But if one of them defects and the other one doesn't, that's better for that individual. So rationally, they're incentivized to defect.
Yeah.
And the solution to this is culture, is community, is like commitment, is muerta if you're the the mob. Like the solution is habituate individuals to like stand tall when they get sort of brought out in that kind of way.
The Goodfellas line: always keep your mouth shut and never rat on your friends.
That's right. That's right. You
yeah.
did the right thing. You stood tall. You stood up. You didn't say shit.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And like they're
exactly.
doing it badly, but like the good version of honor culture is just an like a more robust ethical society where like everyone is just so habituated to be good that they just don't want to be bad.
Yeah. See, and I believe that. I think part of the problem is we have this idea everyone can be pushed to the point where they will kill. Well, I think that's true. Everybody will try to kill the other guy if he's trying to kill you. But not everybody can be pushed to the point where they'll go out and seek revenge or go out and kill for fun. It's just that we don't want to die badly enough that if you're coming at me, I'll try to kill you back. But
right. And like psychologically, the reality is everyone will go into fight, flight, or freeze mode if they're pushed hard enough.
Yeah.
But not everyone will go into fight mode. A lot of people will go into flight or freeze mode, and so will not. One of the things in humankind that's interesting that they point out is that statistically, the majority of people in war don't even try to kill somebody.
Yeah.
They're psychologically incapable of it. So they find that like people aren't shooting their guns or they're compulsively reloading them or stuff.
Shooting into the ground or shooting over people's heads. Yeah, I've actually read about that. It's like the Army has done studies to try to figure out how to fix it. Not that I think that's a thing we should fix. But yeah, most people will never fire at the enemy even when they're being shot at.
Yeah, again, so psychologically, you're working on the hardwiring. Yeah. And one way you do that culturally is with revenge porn, which the Purge is partly, we could be critical of the Purge and say at parts of, like, if you don't buy into the satire, it's like if you take Rick and Morty and you're like, I should be Rick. Like, Purge is not like an unironic good idea in any form, even when you're murdering the white Christian nationalists. So you were saying at the beginning, let's gun down. This is a really complicated question. Ethically, at some point, like, revolutionary violence is justified. That's true. At the same time, revenge porn about revolutionary violence is bad because it habituates people towards callousness and it underappreciates that the revolution is mostly going to involve marginalized individuals up against the wall first. It's a privileged position to say, let's accelerate this shit and burn it all down if the people who are going to die first are the ones who are already most vulnerable, which is what the Purge teaches us, is that like the Purge is bad ethically, even if you think that this is fine because it will disproportionately hurt people who are less wealthy. That's just true. And I love the first one because they highlight specifically in America, the person who's being attacked is Black and a veteran.
Yes. Yeah. And homeless.
And homeless.
And they're homeless
because they're a veteran, because the vast majority of like people who are homeless are often individuals with mental health issues, often PTSD, often from being in war.
Yeah. Hell of a system we've got.
It's a great critique of every level of America. Like the first one, the reason I love the first one is that it's a critique of neoliberalism, which, as a person who was born and raised as a liberal and has like come to become more critical of that view while sympathetic to parts of it, and like come to understand, go from thinking that neoliberal was an unclear, vague concept to being like, oh no, this is really important and it's fucking us over real bad. Like that first episode is perfect because it shows us that the most people in the world are the people who sit in their suburbs and let the chaos happen and don't get involved and are rationally incentivized not to get involved because our society has given them a space to engage in white flight, right? That's what we're showing in that one. We're showing that like America is a racially segregated country where the marginalized are people of color and the white people live in gated communities, literally gated, and so are protected from the harms of their capitalist exploitation. Well,
and Hawke's family, Ethan Hawke, the main character in the film, his family, everything they have is it's war profiteering, I guess, would be the best way to put it. They make their money off of the purge.
Right. And if you accept this critique, really, we all make our money off of the purge, because the purge is the exploitation of marginalized people, broadly speaking.
Yeah.
If it's not a purge in America, it's the purge of the Belgian Congo or something like that.
Your chocolate is made by child slaves. Your cell phone battery involves slavery. Yeah, there's no ethical consumption in a capitalist
society.
There's
no ethical consumption in the universe. And so it's understandable why, if you watch the first one and you're like, well, this is really fucked up, you go to the second one and you're like, oh yeah, I would really prefer that we actually start hunting down people and doing the right thing. And the third one is actually who that is the white Christian nationalists. As leftists, I think that is an understandable progression, but we should realize it's a satire of our progression and not theirs. It's also, a critique of theirs, but at the end of the day, we have to be aware that this is what accelerationism looks like, right? The purge is accelerationism. It's, being like taken advantage of by wealthy white Christian nationalists, but it shouldn't be appealing to the left, and when it is, that's something we should be really scared and cautious about.
So it's very interesting to see on the online left, you see people who are like, well, yeah, burn it down so we can build something better, and it's always, but that fire's going to kill a lot of marginalized people. I mean, you're not building something better for them,
right? Yeah, and I like this kind of content, and another one that I would point to is Lovecraft Country, actually, as a piece of book. Yeah, it's a great book and an even better HBO show, I would argue. I wrote my first peer-reviewed published piece is actually about Lovecraft Country and Afrofuturism and colonial knowledge production, and the idea that we're living in a world built by capitalist settler colonialism, and part of what that means is the people in power are white Christian nationalists, and to some degree removing them from power might include violence. And that show, much more than the book ends very neoliberally.
Yes.
Right? Whereas the show ends very Afro-pessimist. I don't want to spoil it, but let's say it's way, way darker.
Yeah.
And it's way, way more like the solution to colonialism, which we're still living in, is violence. And I like that because I think in a prose world, I, as a philosopher, if I was to come forward and say, we should really start murdering people like Tucker Carlson, the FBI is going to show up at my door, right? Yeah. I can't, even argue, even writing a paper that says, let's consider the arguments in favor of violent revolution, you have some problems a lot of the time, right? Art, on the other hand, can suggest that maybe sometimes violent revolution is actually necessary, but how do you avoid the problem of revenge porn and it turning into bloodlust rather than actually helping people? There's not an easy answer to that question, and I like art because it helps us wrestle with that, even if it doesn't give us a solution.
Yeah. That's so. I know you are a fan of the ones who walk away from Omelas. And I think that is maybe the piece of art that I have spent the most time wrestling with, thinking about the ethics of it. And I think that I've probably spent more time thinking about ethics. I have spent more time with that short story than any of the books by serious philosophers I've read.
That's fair. It's a really, Ursula K. Le Guin is certainly a brilliant philosophical science fiction writer. Dispossessed, stuff like that, all incredibly valuable. And there's no shame, I think, in enjoying and thinking a lot about Omelas. Just if there's no shame in thinking about trolley problems, as long as you don't take them to be the all of ethics or something. But Omelas is a great story for folks who are not familiar. It's a question, right? It's not even, it's hard to say what the answer is, but the question is, how willing are you to buy into utilitarianism or consequentialism, or the idea that a certain quality of ends justifies a certain horrible means? And in this case, the horrible means is if we could concentrate all suffering on one individual. This is actually an important philosophical distribution problem. Do we have an obligation to distribute suffering fairly in the sense of like everybody bears an equal amount, or would it be okay to consolidate all our suffering? Sometimes I use the example of laundry slaves, right? If we had a subset of, you know, dobbies who were out there like doing my laundry for me, right? Like maybe, you know, if we engineered them right, we could have a net utilitarian buy, you know, like outcome, better consequences happiness wise. But would we think that that was slavery and unjust and unethical? Hopefully,
Yeah.
right, because it would be, right? So we would want to not do that. And so Omelas is like, you know, this beautiful city on a hill that is wonderful and like has all this value, but it rests on the suffering of this individual. And is that acceptable? And, you know, the ones who walk away are the ones who say, no, you know, I can't accept that.
Yeah.
It's a really good critique. I would recommend folks also check out N.K. Jemison's response piece, which is called The Ones Who Stay and Fight.
Yeah.
Which is another beautiful, like Lovecraft Country, beautiful Afrofuturist piece about a fully equitable future utopian society where that utopia is maintained by, if they have a technology where you can see, you know, the past or alternate realities. I don't remember exactly how it works, but essentially you can see, you know, our world, right? Mm-hmm. And people who see our world get infected by its thinking in horrible, you know, like in the ways of like buying into meritocracy or buying into like the need for violence or something. And the society's solution is essentially just to murder those individuals because they're infected and we have to quarantine them. And that's the only way to do it. So it's also some people have to bear the burden for utopia, but is it better because it's more equitable? You know, it's a really good question in itself in that way, but it's one that skewers, you know, progressive, woke leftists like myself, rather than the original one, which sort of skewers, you know, a utilitarian, you know, colonialism or something like that.
Would you consider yourself a consequentialist?
No, because I'm a pluralist. So
Okay.
in the strict sense, a consequentialist is someone who believes that consequences, there's different versions, obviously. There's 10 million versions of consequentialism, but broadly speaking, for it to be a view with teeth, it has to either say, you know, you have to prioritize consequences, or you ought to, or consequences are the only thing that are genuinely what matters or an end in themselves or something like that. There's lots of different ways you can cash it out. But essentially, in the game of prioritizing or, you know, setting up a hierarchy for different things of moral value, consequences are the most important or the most something, right? But I'm kind of a pluralist in the sense that I don't think I believe there's a bunch of moral foundations that are objectively true in a realist, non-naturalist kind of meta-ethical way, like all things being equal, you ought not to cause unnecessary suffering, which is a kind of consequentialism, right? But also, all things being equal, you ought to respect autonomy within my weird luck-pilling view, which is a more deontological kind of principle. And I don't think you can easily work out an equation to balance the different moral foundations. It's a complex job of practical reasoning you have to do every time to varying degrees. And so there isn't a radically clear hierarchy between those values. And so I wouldn't call myself a consequentialist. I would call myself, you know, because of the nature of our silly philosophical language, the term would be like a pluralist and a non-consequentialist, because non-consequentialist just means you accept something besides consequences as being irreducibly valuable, separate from the consequences it produces.
Okay.
Or a deontologist, if you want to use a term that people aren't going to want to figure out what that means, right?
Rule follower.
I try to downshift language, you know, rule considerer.
Yeah.
Or you know, like it's a confusion to think of deontology as just being about rules.
Yeah.
Deontology is really just literally non-consequentialism in the sense of saying some things are intrinsically valuable besides outcomes.
Yeah. So I always think of Kant, whom I detest, but he's always he's the only. So I suppose I am some sort of consequentialist, but I can't really nail down what. I mean, Mill and such, I don't think really had it, but I do feel like outcome is what matters. I mean, it's my action.
So you would be pro Purge if it produces a good outcome?
Maybe, yeah, maybe. I mean, honestly, all of my answers are maybe. So,
Yeah, to me, it's kind of a reductio ad absurdum. So, if, for example, I was to ask you would you be pro Holocaust if it produced good outcomes, better outcomes?
Why do you do that? Damn you!
Because I'm an ethicist.
I know.
You asked me what I was. I said I was an
know.
ethicist. I'm the scorpion. You let me climb upon your back. Lol, laughing my ass off. Like
I cannot imagine a scenario in which a Holocaust, in which a genocide of any sort leads to a better outcome for a larger group of people. Okay, give it to me.
Unfortunately,
my
job is to do shit like that.
I know. Give it to me.
Sure. So you have a community of, let's say that like there are some amount of genetic distinctions between populations. We're not talking races, but like population differences. And one population develops a particularly virulent disease that is really horrible and could jump from them to the rest of the population and cause an extinction level event for all of humanity. And the only solution is to find everyone with this genetic marker and kill them.
Why couldn't we quarantine them? Give them their own island.
It's not an effective option.
All right. Damn,
that's the argument, right? Like, unfortunately, there are always ways. This is why you can't just be one thing, is because everything gets bad at some point. I'm not even saying what the right answer is in that situation.
I don't know.
To point out that, unfortunately, you can't solve the problem by just saying, well, I don't believe there's a situation in which Nazis produce better consequences, right? That's just avoiding. That's an ad hoc sort of avoiding. I'll come up with something else, some other like horrible thing that produces consequences.
That's very uncomfortable. Thank you. You've made me very uncomfortable. Yeah.
Don't invite philosophers on your podcast.
I know.
Rule number 1.
All right.
We're bad people.
You know what? I think my favorite thing I've seen you say on Twitter is someone called you dumb, I think. And your response was, you can't win an argument with a philosopher by calling them stupid. We'll just agree with you. Who else would call themselves a philosopher in this economy?
Right. First of all, everyone is a philosopher because anyone dumb enough to call themselves a philosopher, just let them be a philosopher. But also, to paraphrase Dr. Manhattan, the first trick we learned was when people call us dumb, we just say, yeah, we're fucking dumb. Explain it to me. And when they can't explain it to you because you ask them questions and they get really angry, that's philosophy. And then they give you hemlock, and that's philosophy.
All right. So we have gotten far afield. We were talking about a series of movies. Casey, what movies were we talking about?
I don't even remember at this point.
I mean, let's be clear. Ethicists die first in The Purge, right?
Yeah. What's the line from The Good Place when they're talking about the trolley problem?
That's why everybody hates ethics philosophers.
Yeah. By the way, did you like that show?
Loved it.
Yeah. Okay. Me too. Thank you. I was hoping an actual philosopher would love that show as much.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm a bad philosopher. So I'm a bad. What is that from? Anyway, a lot of philosophers don't like. I would say a lot of philosophers don't like The Good Place in the same way that a lot of ethicists don't like trolley problems.
Yeah.
They think probably the same way that a lot of people don't like ER if you're a doctor.
Yeah.
But I think it's much better than the way that ER bastardizes medicine. Good Place is good philosophy. It's a really good show with a really good message.
Yeah.
It carries it all the way through. It delivers. In my opinion, Good Place gets poo-pooed by philosophers who hate on things that are popular philosophy, which is an unfortunate problem in some segments of philosophy, which is anything that isn't, peer-reviewed and noose is not real philosophy. It's, pleb pop culture or some shit like that, which is part of why I do Philosophers in Space, is because, let's be honest, science fiction is philosophy with better special effects. And why wouldn't you want better special effects? Why would you want to just have to read some old white dudes when you could watch, Star Wars or some shit?
Yeah, I know we could all be reading Heidegger, but
sure, right? Or you can understand, Nazism by again watching Star Wars.
Yeah, exactly.
All of Heidegger's right there.
So, Josh. Yes.
Yeah.
So, The Purge.
Anyone's still alive? Have I lulled you all in? Now that you're all slulled, I can just purge all of you because you're in a stupor from the philosophy.
So anyway, I know what the lead for this episode will be. Noted philosopher Aaron Rabinowitz in favor of genocide. Just
Sure.
I know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, in that particular situation, I'm pro genocide, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know what I am in that situation. Yeah. That's there are some things that they talk about that are like moral blind alleys, essentially, where there's no good answer, and it's just like, oh, you've constructed, nightmares beyond human comprehension. Congratulations. The answer is like curl up and die.
Well, I think
That's what. Yeah, we were talking about World War Z before the show. Actually,
Yeah.
one of the things I love most about World War Z, it is the most gruelingly ethical grind you will ever experience. It is the death march of ethics in that kind, like, when they lay out the Rediker plan and stuff. Unlike the Purge, which is implausible, almost everything in World War Z is extremely plausible and the most like soul destroying, horrifying thing you've ever read.
Yeah.
Which is why it's good ethics.
Yeah. So I think aren't the questions that might not have, and well, I mean, it will have an answer, but the questions that we just can't conceivably get to the right answer to yet, are those the most interesting?
They're sometimes the most interesting. I would worry. There's a problem sometimes in ethics, especially where people will focus on extreme or edge cases a little too much. Speaking as somebody who's obsessed with the Nazis, I can't throw too much shade here, obviously. Part of the great thing about the Nazis is they were like, hey, let's do a test case for what really bad looks like, and then we can look at that for a long time. There's lots of other ones that are like that, obviously, but as a Jew, it particularly appeals to me. There's also, like, as a luck pilling person, I think everybody understands luck pilling. We're just afraid to admit it. And it's like a solved problem in the philosophical sense, but it's the psychological and cultural problem where we have to fix it. And so what we need are things like the Purge, which teaches us to remember that it's all fucking luck. And so if you purge, it's just going to be more bad luck for people who are already suffering. So maybe create a system of mutual reciprocal benefit that helps people like experience less bad luck.
So I think it is almost psychological death for some people to accept the idea that they may not be fully responsible for what they see as their accomplishments. The angriest I have ever seen a human who was not throwing fists or trying to stab someone was in a philosophy class 25 years ago when our instructor was explaining, my brain does this to me sometimes, was explaining, okay, hold on. I just had one of those.
Not luck, something else?
No. So
free will.
Yes, but what is the fucking word?
Personhood.
No, the actual. So we don't have free will because
determinism, compatibilism.
Determinism. Thank you. Determinism. Jesus, my brain just locked. Yeah, was explaining determinism.
That's why you do dialogue.
And a kid in the class was convinced, and it clicked with them that they didn't have free will, and they got so mad. I mean, they stomped out of class, and it was like they were raging because they had been convinced that they didn't have free will, and that destroyed everything they believed.
Yeah, there's even a book that I write that I'm writing critiques of by a guy named Smolansky, where he essentially argues that he is convinced of the truth of the no free will argument, but believes that it is harmful enough to society that we should engage in a noble lie approach where we lie to people and tell them we have free will when we don't, because otherwise they'll act terribly and go on a purge. So yeah, that's like a common thing. But it also acknowledges that, like, we all know that we don't have free will, and it is something that is very like threatening to people, because your sense of selfhood as an independent individual, where you deserve to take credit for being who you are and doing what you do, is fundamentally like not just threatened, but has to go away and has to be replaced by something else. And what that other thing is scary. But to bring this back to the Purge, another way to like analyze the Purge philosophically is to talk about it as an immigration allegory, especially the first one, right? Where, when I talk about the luck stuff, especially with leftists who are pro-immigration, I start with national borders, and like, what is a national border if not a luck dam, where you as a community or a country extort or exploit extract a bunch of wealth from the other side of the border, pull it into your, pool, and then build a wall that keeps it from flowing back to other countries. That's what colonialism was, and we're all benefiting in the first world, the developed world, from that extraction and from these walls, these gated communities, where we tell ourselves that we've earned the right to be in those communities in some silly way, but like you were just lucky enough to be born on the right side of that dam. That's all.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to get people's mind around the idea. The Obama, you didn't build that line that pissed people off so much, but you didn't build the highway that those trucks came on, and you you got a tax. You got a tax benefit for using someone else's money to build that factory and blah, blah, blah. No, you didn't build it.
And we should, it's important to point out, I think, in the Purge, we don't want to just use a capitalist critique or a Marxist critique here and say, like, really all of this is individuals who fully believe in, who believe in nothing, right? They're just like nihilist, Lebowski style, but they love money. And all of this is just, a bunch of cultural, like culture war cover for just extracting more wealth and protecting that wealth in that kind of way. That is true for some people. But a lot of the people really believe in just world fallacy, the idea that we are living in a just universe, usually because there's a God who's like making sure that we're living in a just universe, either by like making sure in this world people suffer if they're bad people, or in the next world, whichever. And so if you believe that, you are more predisposed to be conservative, you're more predisposed to believe in punitive justice, you're more predisposed to believe that like poverty is the consequence of personal choice and lack of hard work, rather than systems or factors beyond your control. And then you're gonna like genuinely be pro-purge. Again, I started at the beginning with like social Darwinism. That's where you end up if you buy into that kind of just worldview, because you think that like God is gonna stand by the righteous and the people who have done bad will be purged. Like it's a flood allegory in that sense.
I didn't think about it as a flood allegory. That's actually interesting. All right, I like that. And if you have the privilege of being God's select and you get to build a boat ahead of time, you're lucky enough to survive. But if you're, I do my luck pilling talks sometimes for atheists in particular, and I point to a bunch of examples in the Bible of like bullshit moral luck, like Adam and Eve falling because they did something they didn't know was wrong, or, I like to point to the giant tree sloths of, in America, right? If the flood myth is true, then at one point there was a giant tree sloth just like doing nobody any harm, and then it just floods and everybody dies. And they get to tree sloth heaven and they find out that the reason they're dead is because the humans did some bad shit. Like, that's not fucking ethical, but that's what God does, because, just world or something. Yeah. All right, guys. So Aaron and I have been talking all night. So Josh, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah.
Pastor, come on. Tell us what you think of the Purge.
Nothing like what you guys are saying.
That's okay.
Yeah, you sound like when Thomas was on Philosophers in Space, and he's like, I don't watch movies the same way you do. I don't see any. What the fuck are you talking about, Aaron? None of this is in the movie.
Are you?
That's exactly the way I was thinking. Most of the time when Nate's talking about movies, he goes well beyond the way I look at him. So
fair.
It's all good.
Well, you weren't here, Casey, when we did Barbarian, and I went on a whole thing about the rising and lowering sea levels that created the Michigan Basin, and how the salt deposits were built up over millions of years of that happening, and that's what that movie's about.
So I'm curious about y'all's experiences if you're not doing what I'm doing. I would feel like if I wasn't doing what I was doing, I would hate watching The Purge, because it's like Saw. It's just, or Hostel. It's just revenge porn and like torture porn. And like, if there's no purpose or meaning to it or underlying symbolism, like I don't want to watch, like the point of Videodrome is not to want to watch Videodrome. Like the point is to not want to watch Videodrome. And this is, a kind of Videodrome if it's not a satire. So like, do you enjoy this, or do you just find it horrible and like, why is anyone watching it?
Casey? Because I know.
No, I enjoy it. I just like I'm all about just the I like revenge porn. I like the gore. I like the killing. I like the.
I'm sorry for everything I said about you before I knew that.
It's fine. No, I just find it. I'm just along for the ride. It's just a fun ride. There's like you guys were talking about earlier. I don't think if we had a purge in real life that it wouldn't be anything like that. There's no way. Especially like when the siren sounds at the end and they all just like stop immediately, like right when they're about to shoot somebody. Yeah. That's ridiculous. That's not gonna happen. I mean, if they're already to that point and they're just about to shoot somebody, they're just going to shoot them. They're not going to, the sirens.
It's like Gremlins level kind of, don't think about the rules too much or it's going to just all fall apart really fast.
Yeah. And then the neighbors, when they came over with, their plan all along was to kill that family. Yeah. I don't think they would have acted like, I could see them being upset about that and maybe acting out revenge in that fashion, but they just acted really strange. Like they were inhuman or something.
They wanted, so the thing about that is, so they want the Ethan Hawke family dead for revenge. There are other people actively killing them, and they come in and kill the killers. And
that's a bit of a Rwandan genocide situation too, I think, where there's a point is that like some amount of people will choose this as a moment to take advantage for their own benefit in a way that looks to them as like more respectable or something like that.
So Josh?
Yeah, and while I was watching it, my thoughts are beyond just the, enjoying the killing and stuff. I was thinking about shit like that stupid kid. Well, I mean, he wasn't really stupid. I could see why he felt for,
the weird kid that makes like the most ethical decision of the entire movie?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I understand why he did what he did. And in the end, it kind of benefited everybody but the dad.
Which choice was that again?
To let the homeless man in.
Yeah, to let the homeless man in.
Oh, yeah. To break quarantine. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But the most ethical decision made in the entire film, honestly.
Again, let's be clear, accurate in the sense that 9 times out of 10, if you do something ethical, you might get fucked over for it. Like, oftentimes, like if we view this as a critique of social progress, that social progress is horrible and not actually the pleasant experience we wish it would be. Part of the truth of that is that the people who do the right things during like social justice movements often suffer. They don't benefit. People after them might benefit, but most of them live shittier lives because of it.
Yeah. Many of them die from it.
Yeah. Or, I do stuff about, mandatory busing during desegregation, and the students who did get bused to other schools often also had a rough life. The Little Rock Nine don't have a great time because they are the poster children of desegregation. That's not a good experience for humans. So actually I'm curious, Josh, what was your experience?
On the first one, that shitty kid, I was going to follow up on Casey's point. Ethics be damned. As a parent, my kid would not have the code, so I wouldn't have to worry about that, and I would be alive.
Quite the authoritarian fascist. I see you're holding on the right side of the political
but I mean, for the most part, the first one and the second one kind of just looked at it on face value. I didn't really get into the whole politics until about anarchy. And then they definitely introduced the election and things like that, and you can't help but get pulled into that a little bit. And then especially towards the end when they had like the forever purge, 100%. I mean, it's just it takes a hard side on that one, and then you can ignore it. Like the first one, you don't really need to pay attention, but when you get to the last ones, there's an opinion on there.
Yeah. So you don't find it political that they specifically choose that the homeless person is both black and a veteran?
Oh, absolutely, but I can ignore it. Just like
I see.
You can make other like I saw. You can make different differentiations between like what you're taking from that as opposed to just being revenge porn.
So you can watch Romero's Dawn of the Dead, and it's a movie about the dead getting up and chewing on living people, and you can ignore all of the social commentary that was there.
Yeah, my favorite version of
like
this
the first time I saw Dawn of the Dead.
What was that, Aaron?
My favorite version of this idea is the Onion article that's like woman wants to turn off her mind for half an hour so that she can watch, bride television show without being aware of the horrifying social implications of that content.
Exactly.
And this goes back to the point of the revenge porn thing, which is also something that I think is well analyzed in the Rick and Morty Let's Go Purge episode. I would say that revenge porn is like other kinds of content where it is okay if it's not the only thing. You know, if all of your action is revenge porn stuff, then you have a culture that's going to be problematic. It's going to be overly honor culture-y. It's going to be overly simplistic in its understanding of social problems and stuff like that. So, you know, the problem with revenge porn is that it always has to simplify social problems down to a single individual who you can hurt and thereby solve the problem. But almost no real significant social problems are solvable in that way. So it doesn't give us an actual path forward. It is a narcotic. It is a analgesic in the sense that it gives you the illusion of, you know, again, a just experience without actually ever getting justice.
Yeah. So in the real world, it rarely comes down to a single person, and rarely are people that easily categoric.
Yeah. This is the problem with Marvel as well. I love Marvel
as good or bad. Yeah.
Right. I love Marvel. You can't punch poverty. Yeah. You know, like there's no movie where you punch the shit out of like people being tortured when they're young and so turning into bad, you know, like immoral people when they're older. That's the part of like Black Panther where they actually take all of their wealth and distribute it the way they fucking should have already. Like the only person who's right in Black Panther besides the bad guy is the lady who's like, we should have been doing this 20 years ago. What are we doing here?
So this is a problem with Marvel movies. They like to make bad guys who start out and they say, we should distribute this wealth. And you're like, why is he the bad guy? He's the good guy. And then he kills a bunch of people. And it's like, why do you give the bad guy the right position?
Well, and to be fair, if we're serious about revolutionary violence, there may be a bad guy who should kill the people. So I want to throw out a philosopher here for folks who might be really interested in challenging themselves, if they're liberals or neoliberals or centrists or whatever moderate name you want to call yourself, where you're like, how dare you suggest that we should ever engage in military, you know, like violence of a political nature. You're just calling for another January 6th. You're just like them. You're just as bad as them, blah, blah, blah. Like, go read Franz Fanon's on violence, and I'm not saying he's right or I'm not saying he has a solution, but like fucking sit with his comments where he's like, you know, when liberals show up and say, you know, slow down, we'll figure it out, let's talk through this, let's reason our way through this, is when he most wants to grab a weapon, because he knows that that's when they're going to really fuck you over. Another example of this, I love Discovery as a Star Trek show. I love that the Klingons at the beginning are like, when they come and they say, we come in peace, what they mean is we're going to destroy your culture.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I like that. That's pretty realistic. Yeah.
I'm not saying that, you know, Klingon culture is good or should be preserved necessarily. I'm saying let's be honest about, you know, what it means to say no one is ever allowed to engage in revolutionary violence while also glorifying the American Revolution.
Yeah.
You're saying
that's bizarre.
Anti-colonialism is okay if they're white.
That's bizarre. I don't know how you can justify the American Revolution if you think that violence is always wrong.
And the American Revolution, you know, is deeply connected to the Haitian Revolution.
Yeah.
And these other kind of revolutions that were happening, and the French Revolution, right? Yeah. This idea that like that period was really important because it was being influenced by philosophy that was driving things like the French Revolution, or being driven by them, right? You can say, I'm not going to say that philosophy is fixing or, you know, not fixing everything, but there is a feedback loop between culture, people, and philosophy, where you see, you know, theories of justice leading to revolutions, leading to conflict, leading to like new systems by which the same wealth and power is retained and reproduced only under an ethical guise of meritocracy or something like that, right? So the Purge is anti-meritocracy, amongst other things, which is one of the reasons I love it so dearly, is because what it's saying is you didn't earn the right to sit in your little, you know, like gated community and let other people die. You didn't earn that. You got it because of luck, and it's deeply immoral to let that just go on in that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. So, okay, guys, let's take a quick poll of the room. The Purge, when it happens, good or bad? Casey, Purge, good or bad?
I think it's bad. I mean, the movies are enjoyable, but I think it's a bad thing. Like, I don't think it would help anything.
Josh, are you pro Purge? Are you one of the new founding fathers?
No. To watch a fictional concept, yes, it's great. But if it was real, no.
Okay, so we won't Purge this year. All right.
Josh, speaking of revenge porn, my one of my favorite current philosophers is C.T. Nien, who does a lot of stuff on porn in the sense of the philosophical, what does it actually mean? And their definition that they use with one of the people they write with is porn is when you get to enjoy something without the potential costs of that thing. So it's a low stakes, sort of artificial version of something, right? Which is obvious for porn, but they expand, like porn, sex porn, but they expand it to include, he and I put together an idea on an ETV that I think has sort of slipped into pop culture more, which is civility porn, which is the idea of, like the people who love debate, where it's like, we're so cool because we can get together and debate the humanity of trans people or something like that. Right. And like, it's amazing that we can have this debate in this kind of way. And a lot of times they don't actually have a rigorous debate. It's a lot of like being too civil and not actually, digging in this kind of way. But it gives the illusion of like rigorous civil discourse. So it's porn in that sense. But there's no cost for the people involved. Just asking questions is a kind of civility porn, right? I'm just raising the question of whether trans people should be allowed to be themselves or something like that, right? Like, it's not going to hurt me, but I just want to talk about it. Revenge porn is problematic in the sense that all kinds of porn can be problematic if they become too much of your world, right? I'm very for porn in the right proportions, right? It's sort of the basic idea of like, porn is great. Porn isn't the real thing. And if you get the artificial thing only and always, you will have a distorted understanding of the real thing, and that will cause problems.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of civility and just letting we need to accept the other person's viewpoint. What do you think of Karl Popper?
Yeah, a lot of this is paradox of tolerance, right? It's the when is someone fash enough that you should shoot them? And the answer is it's hard. There's no line. There's no formula. And in the moment, this is something I always talk about with ethics, the trolley problem. And then let me forget about restorative justice. We need to talk about restorative justice. But, part of the problem with the trolley is that often people think of it as like there's a clear answer or you can figure it out, or like the point of philosophy is to figure it out. It's about realizing that there are, in my opinion, incommensurate, irreducible trade-offs in any ethical judgment. My favorite trolley problem is one that's like, it's sort of how it's like a virtue ethics style trolley problem. And it's an old guy who comes back, or person, let's say, who comes back to the stick figure, who comes back to the lever, and it's broken and it's, everything's overgrown. And the text says, it's been 20 years since you made the choice. You come back here every year and you don't ever know if you've made the right choice, but you hope that you did. And that's ethics. A lot of the time you're doing what you think is the right thing, hopefully. Sometimes you get it wrong, but sometimes you don't. A lot of times I think even if you think you're getting it right, you might not even know that you're getting it wrong. So there's no being sure when you've done the right revolutionary violence. And a lot of times people will do the kind of like post hoc rationalization where it's like, well, it worked, right? It's the classic idea, you're a freedom fighter if you win and you're a terrorist if you lose. Right. So none of those are answers to the problem, but it does help us, I think, clarify the problem. One other thing I want to mention about revenge porn is that like I lean very restorative justice because I'm luck-pilled. I'm not for punitive justice. I don't think that anyone deserves to suffer, even Trump or the white Christian nationalists or whatever. I don't want to see them violently purged. I just want to see them helped into not hurting other people. And restorative justice, a lot of the arguments in favor of from a psychological perspective are that, as far as we can tell, psychologically, humans don't actually get that much out of watching revenge. Like, if you are a person who's been deeply harmed, and you get to see that person be tortured or whatever as punishment, it doesn't actually make you happier, is what the evidence basically suggests. You know, and we know this, like so many of the revenge porn that isn't porn, like the revenge stories that are legitimate, end with the person realizing that revenge has consumed them and they're miserable, and like they learn the Buddhist principle of, you know, you've poisoned yourself kind of thing. Again, it doesn't mean there's never a reason for evolutionary violence, but like restorative justice finds that what people who are harmed really want is to make sure the harm never happens again. And the best way to do that is make sure the person understands what they've done wrong. And the best way to do that is a system where we don't say that we're going to torture someone as soon as we find out they've done something wrong, because then there's no incentive to do anything but hide your sins and purge everyone else if they become public.
Better to remove the conditions that led to the criminal behavior than to punish the criminal. Yeah.
That's the luck pilling view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm with you there. Okay, guys. So we have run up against the end of our time. So let's do a little quick wrap up on how we feel. So, Josh, you said 8 words tonight. I'm very proud of you. You're deep into this conversation. So, real quick, what do you like, what do you dislike about the Purge movies?
Well, in the 8 words that I spoke, I pretty much touched on it, but I like them at face value for the most part. I didn't really dig into them intellectually like you guys did, because I don't want to. I want to stare at a TV for an hour and a half and then go back to doing whatever
Sometimes
shit
I
was
just
doing
want to see
before.
an exploding head, you know?
Exactly.
It calms me.
I get it. I play violent video games.
Yeah.
I'm with you. You know, I get it. I want to shoot people
But I also
sometimes.
understand the implications and the deeper meaning behind it. I mean, you know, that I look at the lawn and you guys have the shovels, so it's you have to figure out what's underneath it, and I'm just mowing the grass.
I know nothing. I was excited to get someone who knew what they were talking on it.
Well, you talked like you
about
knew what
on
you were
here
talking
because
about.
I ran about this shit all the time, and I don't know what I'm talking about.
If you don't want to care about the philosophy of it, the first one is still really good horror, because in my opinion, home invasion is one of the most fucked up things to think about and deal with, you know. And so if you're able to deal with that, like my dad, for example, loves horror. Part of the reason I am the way I am is because I watched movies like this when I was way too young, and it just turned me into this.
You're one of us.
I'm a high functioning sociopath, at least.
Yeah.
That's why I learned ethics. If you asked earlier, you know, if you just want to turn your brain off and you're not like my dad who can't cope with home invasion because it's the one kind of horror that is too real and scary for him, it's a really good home invasion horror. Like really, it's you know, I would argue the first one is not revenge porn in my opinion. The first one really wrestles with serious problems and isn't just revengey. I would argue a lot of these are not actually super revenge porny because they often don't, you know, end up in a happy-go-lucky place with all the murder. They're often like, no, this sucks too, and we don't like this any better.
They get sold as horror, but really only the first one is. The rest of them are more thriller, action-oriented, and, you know, saying something, being satire.
Yep, aliens.
Yeah, exactly. Alien horror, Aliens, an action film. That's too long.
And unfortunately, too Reagan. Like some of the Purge.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Purge is criticizing Reagan, right? This is all like tough on crime thing too.
Yeah. Casey, Ann?
Yeah, I just enjoyed all the action. Like I said before, I'm not a real political person or religious person, so I just take everything at face value. And I saw the political and religious views in the films, but it just doesn't matter to me. So I just watch them for fun, just turn my brain off, and I enjoyed all of them. I didn't really find any big faults in any of them. Even the latest one, I enjoyed it quite a bit.
So I don't think there is really a very weak entry in the series. They're all pretty solid. Yeah, which is odd for a franchise that's been around this long.
Yeah, I'm telling you, this is top shelf cultural satire right here. Whether you like cultural satire or not, it's a good show. It's a good movie. Yeah, I'm also for turning my brain off. I have guilty pleasure shows like Archer that are, you know, there's some philosophy in Archer, but mostly it's a lot of really, really, really good dick and fart jokes.
We do like dick and fart jokes here. We
Me
really
too.
do.
I'm pro, dick and like I feel like I don't want to convey on this show that I'm only interested in things that I can overanalyze. I also like things that I can't overanalyze or don't want to. It's just, I think you brought me on here to overanalyze this.
This is exactly what I
Nate
wanted.
Definitely did.
Yeah.
Well,
this episode was for me. This one was for me. So we've done episodes that was for the other guys. Actually, no, we haven't.
You do them for your audiences at some point, or
no,
is it
never,
mostly just
never.
for each other? Yeah.
Mostly, this is so like we got Lloyd Kaufman, the founder of Troma Entertainment. We got him on, and I don't care if the audience cared or not. I wanted to talk to Lloyd Kaufman.
That's my philosophy with podcasting too. I'm gonna talk about what the fuck I want. If you want to show up, great.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, that's our time. Aaron, I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. This was a lot of fun. Will you come back another time?
If you're not completely purged of wanting to have an ethicist around you, sure.
100% need that. 100% need that. So everybody out there, all
I
seven
survive
of you.
long enough.
All seven of you out there, check out Philosophers in Space. It is on all of the podcast apps. Absolutely, I'm a big fan. If you want something that's less pop culture-y, I think, Embrace the Void is Aaron's other podcast. Check that out. Then run over to Rutgers University and sign up for one of his classes.
Yeah.
Be sure to check us out. You're either watching us on the YouTube or listening to us on one of the podcast apps. Check us out on the other one. We're on Facebook at Bloodfest Pod. We're on TikTok at Bloodfest the Podcast, Twitter at Bloodfest Pod, and Instagram at Bloodfest the Podcast. And we're on Patreon. Just Google it. I don't remember what the thing is. So anyway, give us a like, a share, a follow. I'm Nate. And for all of the team, catchphrase.